Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adobe Live. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we are creating and streaming today and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Flynn, and I'm hosting today here in Asia Pacific. I'm in Sydney. It's a little bit chilly, actually. But let us know where you're tuning in from around the world. If you're in Australia or if you're somewhere else, it's always wonderful to hear where you're tuning in from. And yeah, we have a fantastic stream today. And if you have any questions throughout, please don't hesitate to throw those questions in chat. We are live. We can answer questions. Yeah, we're live on YouTube and live on Behance. There we go. Done all my housekeeping stuff. And I'd love to introduce Bill Hope. Hello, Bill. How are you?
I'm very good. Hey, Flynn. Hey, Ben.
I've been very well, thank you. It's been a little bit too long, I think, between live streams with you because I always have such a blast. We've known each other for a very long time. And we have a very exciting stream that's happening today too, which is very cool. And so it's great to have you back on.
Thank you very much. It is a very exciting stream. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. So I hope we have some of our regular viewers because it's a nice stream for me in that it's actually got quite a bit of to do with my history joining the Adobe live streams. And I'm really looking forward to talk about it. So I'll just introduce myself. My name's Bill Hope. I'm a illustrator from the Blue Mountains, which is a little bit west of Sydney in Australia. And I do all kinds of commercial illustration. And more recently, I've been doing a lot of work in children's books. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. I'm going to talk about illustrating children's books in general, but also specifically about a book that I've got coming out in 1 week from now, which is a really exciting book that is going all around the world. So I know we've got lots of American viewers and some from the Asia Pacific region. So hopefully this book will be coming to you in the near future.
Yeah.
I started off doing kind of look and find kind of books, like sort of like a Where's Wally style kind of books. So there were these really intricate, detailed kind of illustrations. But the book that I've been working on currently now, and the one I'd like to talk about, is one where I've been collaborating with an author and really working back and forth to produce a illustrated children's books that's pitched at kind of the sort of 6 to 10 age range. So it's kind of thought of as like a kid's first chapter book. So this is I'll show you the book now. It's a full-sized 300-page book. Every page is illustrated.
Wow.
So it's a big book.
It's a big job.
It's a big job. And if you're a kid reading, it might be sort of your sort of first book that you read the whole way through. That it's broken into chapters. So there's a lot of words, but there's a lot of pictures. It's sort of filled the whole way through.
Very good.
So this book is by an Australian author called Andy Griffiths. If you're an Australian viewer, I'm sure you'll be familiar with his work. He's been, I think, Australia's best-selling children's author for the past 15 years or so, but has been producing books for a good 25 years. But many American viewers might know of him as well. If you are tuning in from America, I thought a good sort of comparison for Andy Griffiths is kind of like Jeff Kinney. If you know the Wimpy Kid books, Andy Griffiths holds a sort of a similar place in the Australian identity to Jeff Kinney and his output in America. So I feel like I'm kind of rambling on, Flynn. Is there anything you want to talk about or questions you want to ask before we get stuck into it?
No, that's great. I think that's a really excellent way to kind of kick things off. And I think also in Bill's history, I think you fine art trained as well. We met when you were doing live scribing, so it's not like you've always been in this particular field, which I think is quite interesting, and people should kind of take away as well. As practitioners, I've watched your career take maybe 2 or 3 different huge leaps since I've known you, and I think it's inspirational, but it's also kind of just contextually, I think, very interesting for a lot of us are freelancers. A lot of us kind of run their own show and freelance their work out and stuff like that. And we're definitely living in an age of upskilling and cross-skilling and things like that. So just wanted to kind of call that part of your history out. It's not like you woke up and then suddenly you were a children's book artist. So other than that, I think we're good to kind of jump into the meat and potatoes of the whole thing.
Cool. That's a really good point, Flynn. Like I have done all kinds of different illustration of my career. It's kind of just taken me wherever the work has been. But this job's really special to me in that it's something I've always wanted to do. This kind of book, and I mean, I've been working illustration for 10 years now, but it's still a really new experience. This process of collaborating with an author and making sort of custom illustrations to fit a narrative and a story and character. So I'm really keen to talk about that part of it and that sort of collaborative aspect of it, because a lot of my career up to this point has been been that illustrator, gun for hire, whatever comes up, you're drawing the next job.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so I'll sort of give a little bit of background to the story of this book. So Andy Griffiths has been working with a previous illustrator for his whole career, almost about 25 years, with an amazing illustrator called Terry Denton. And it came to the point where they were looking to start a new series and were looking for a new illustrator. And Andy's designer, actually, a really nice lady called Liz Seymour, was looking for a new illustrator. And I think she told me the story. She was literally just Googling like Sydney illustrator into Google. And somehow, I don't know how, one of these Adobe streams came up and she started watching a stream that I had done a couple of years ago with Flynn. And I think it was one of these collaborative drawing streams. So it was one where I was sketching and people were writing in saying, hey, make the rhinoceros fly away or make the swan turn into a canoe or whatever. Yeah. Just people pitching random ideas at me.
I remember it so well, yeah.
And we've done a few of these and they're really fun. But Liz really responded to sort of the freeness of the sketching that we were doing and sort of the fact that it was digital but had sort of a inky, sketchy kind of feel to it. And that really suited something they were looking for. And eventually came in and did a number of samples for the publisher. And we had a period of kind of back and forth, deciding if it was the right fit. And eventually I got the job to illustrate this new book. Yeah, from then, it's been about a year-long process of collaborating with this author, Andy Griffiths, and sending back ideas and sketches and sort of characters and plot ideas back and forth until we've ended up with this book, which is coming out in a week's time. So the book is called Adventures Unlimited, is kind of the series title, and then the book's called The Land of Lost Things. So it's about these two characters that go to a land where lost things go. So if you lost your car keys, or you've got a missing lost sock, or you've lost your umbrella on the train or something, all these things accumulate in this sort of magical land of lost things. And our two characters have lost something and they need to go find it. So they end up in the land of lost things. I'll just switch over to a little PDF that I've worked up that shows a little bit of the process. I'm keen to talk about this process of starting with the seed of an idea of a story and then turning that into a sort of cohesive look and world which the reader of the book in the end can kind of inhabit.
Wow.
So I hope you can see that PDF, Flynn. Is that coming through okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'll just start cycling through that. So this is the very first manuscript that I received from Andy. He would sort of make these, I think it's just a keynote document, and he'd drop these sort of really simple graphics in as sort of an initial first run of the book, and I would start developing it. So you can see this very first script. The first thing I received was you'd have these sections where it'd say, as soon as the pterodactyl was way behind us, bye bye birdie. So Andy would drop in these sort of clip art kind of things to just sort of give an idea of what he was thinking about really early on. And from there, we didn't go into specifics. It was about kind of trying to think of like, what's the style or the feeling of these drawings? So these are some of the first drawings that I sent back. We've got one of a rock here with a bird on it, and it's doing some knitting. And I've got some zombies here. And at this stage, we were just really kind of looking for a feeling to the drawings. We're not thinking about any of the details of what this story is going to be. It was about just kind of trying to capture an essence or a spirit of what we were trying to do, and trying to find a way that it would line up with the author's approach to storytelling. Wow. Andy comes from a kind of punk do-it-yourself kind of background. we wanted something that referenced the previous illustrations but wasn't in the same style. It was something that was my own but had some kind of visual link to the previous illustrator. So this kind of quick, sketchy, rough kind of stuff, and something that was funny and silly and kind of irreverent. And these were the first ones that really connected with the publisher and with the author, and they said, "This is the kind of idea that we've got. This is the feeling like the right vision."
So just to throw a quick question down there, I've got hundreds, but I won't bombard you with all of them.
Yeah.
But just, I think the best one I can think of is during that process, you said collaborating with Andy, but then of course you mentioned all these stakeholders. I'm just wondering, is it you and Andy kind of together and then going, yep, this is the direction we think we're going to go, and then that's shared with kind of these stakeholders? Or is it like a 25 people on an email thread sort of situation going on there?
That's a really great question. It's been an interesting process in that it's really naturally evolved. When I first got this job, I assumed it would be a matter of me waiting until the book was finished, and then someone would send me the manuscript, and it was like, okay, put drawings in. And I kind of thought that's what it would be, and I think often that is the case. But with this one, we started chatting early, and I know that Andy had previously had a very close relationship with Terry Denton, where they would get together and kind of sketch and come up with funny ideas in the same room together. Andy and I live in different states, so that wasn't going to be possible. But what I thought would be fun was to us just jump on a Zoom call like this and talk, and I would draw exactly like we are doing now. It was kind of, I sort of suggested to Andy, like, let's just do the live stream, but with nobody watching.
It's
kind
a
of
private
thing.
live stream. That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we would have these long Zoom calls where he would be pitching ideas and I would be drawing and sharing my screen, and we'd kind of go back and forth that way. Because Andy's been quite successful in the publishing industry and he has a very supportive publisher in Macmillan, they kind of leave him to it. I think I have been in situations where a publisher was much more prescriptive because they had a specific product that they wanted to make. But we were really left to ourselves. So it was basically Andy and I would get on calls, we'd be sketching, drawing, coming up with ideas, and thankfully we had a very supportive and enthusiastic publisher who was kind of happy for us to go wherever he decided.
Sounds like a lovely creative experience to go through, right?
Yeah, it's been really, it's gone better than I could have thought. And it's been really surprising, I think, that Andy and I just share a very similar aesthetic, I think, and sort of sense of humor and sense of sort of philosophy to creativity. I think we both take it very seriously, but I think we're inherently quite silly people, and everything has to be a joke and nonsense. Yeah, we kind of meshed really well in that respect. Right. And the exciting thing about this project was there really wasn't that much when we started. We kind of had this idea of it was about something that was lost, and but we didn't know who the main characters were. We didn't know what was going to happen, anything like that. So at the start, we really just started thinking about like what could our main characters look like before we had a plot whatsoever. And we started off with these are a bunch of different designs that I was coming up with for a potential main character that was this kid, or maybe Andy was going to be the main character. He'd been characters in his previous books. But we ended up deciding that the book should be phrased as you and me go on an adventure. So the reader is referred to in the book as you, as me, and the reader of the book is referred to as you. So you and me are the two main characters. Kids would always say, I want to be in your next book, Andy. So he's decided, I'm going to give you what you want. You're the main character of the next book.
Right.
And that developed a real challenge for us because we needed to develop characters. Sorry, I'm skipping way ahead here.
Wow.
That were anonymous in a sense. They could be anybody. So they're characters that, in a sense, kind of without race or gender or any other description. There are the people who are inside these costumes. So we had this really tricky conundrum that our main two characters in the book, called you and me, had to be potentially anybody. So they're sort of covered up by these adventure masks and these adventure suits. So I'll jump back to the start.
It's a really clever idea.
And I'll show you some of the process of sort of coming up with characters. So Andy had this character called Johnny Knucklehead, who was going to be a kind of he was like a friendly villain. He was sort of like a agent provocateur. He would be someone who was going to come into the story and mess things up, and you're going to have to, and he would move the story along. And he was kind of this mean, almost like bully kind of character, but it was meant to be kind of lovable. So I did a bunch of sketches here. So I did these 3 sketches of these 3 different characters. And they were feeling okay. I was kind of happy with them, but they weren't really going anywhere. And at the end, I just thought I'd do a silly drawing, and I did Johnny Knucklehead was just a guy with a fist for a head. And Andy absolutely loved that. He was like, "This is the guy. This is the character." And then sort of one of the main characters of the book became Johnny Knucklehead, who's basically this guy with a hand for a head. Very challenging to draw hundreds of times. I've got quite good at drawing fists. If anybody has struggled with hands in the past, you know this is a
We'll do a whole live stream how to draw hands.
On my part. Yeah.
Amazing.
We came up with lots and lots of different characters, and it's been a really interesting process for me of I kind of think about it in terms of like you're pitching lots and lots of characters, and you need to be okay with letting some of those characters go if they're not really working out or serving the story. And I think as a commercial illustrator, I'm used to being like paid per drawing, basically. Like I'll do storyboard frames, and you've done a drawing. That's a kind of has like an economic value in of itself. You've spent the time doing that. Totally. And doing this job was a totally different perspective, in that I had to be okay with doing 100 drawings, and one of them was the right one, and I just had to let the rest of them go. And that was a really interesting process of I kind of thought about it as trying to have a sort of abundant mindset. Like I do one drawing, and it's worked or it hasn't worked, or this character's working, but at some point, if it's not serving the story, you just have to let that go and move on. Some people talk about it as like killing your darlings. If you love an idea, but you become too focused on it, it's not serving the bigger purpose, and you have to let them go. So I've just included this one, which was the old timer. He appeared throughout the whole book. We did hundreds of drawings of old timer, but at some point he didn't have he wasn't progressing the story in some way, and he had to get cut. So I had to go through and erase poor old timer from every step of the book. Yeah. And there were a bunch of things like that. So that was a really big sort of learning curve for me. This is another one that I think of as sort of like an idea for the book that didn't work out, that we had to move on. So we had these snapping turtles, which are a character in the book, and for some reason I went down this rabbit hole of trying to come up with every kind of rhyming turtle. So there's rapping turtles and flapping turtles and trapping turtles and clapping turtles and yapping turtles and tapping turtles. And the slapping turtles.
My God.
And all the things. And we loved this idea so much, but there just wasn't a place for it. You just had to let it go. Yeah. And I think a huge learning curve working on this book with Andy is he cares a lot about editing, and he cares a lot about quality. I'm used to sort of this idea of like, you've had a good idea and that's great, you've done the good thing. But that process of constantly checking back on your work and refining and reducing down until you get just the ideas that serve the purpose best and you're really proud of.
If I may, it reminds me a little bit more of graphic design, and probably a little bit more of something like logo design. I think like that process that you just described reminds me a lot of going through a very lengthy kind of branding project where everything's working until it's not, and you really have to go back and cut things out, and presenting multiple ideas and ending up with some amalgamation of them, and then really refining it down, and then kind of exporting everything and realizing that some of the sizing doesn't quite work, and you kind of have to go back to that original idea. It reminds me a little bit of that design process, and you look back at your original file, and it's just like dog's breakfast. Like, it's just of all these different directions you attempted to go in that had a good idea but didn't move the project forward.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's been the really interesting thing for me. I think I'm very much used to sort of producing work quickly that was moving quickly and trying to have a very efficient process. And I had to become used to a process that was intentionally sort of wasteful and inefficient in a sense that you were not sorry, that sounds like a negative thing, but I mean that like you were saying, you're producing a huge volume of stuff and then just refining down to the things that you thought were best, and that just being something where like quality is the absolute thing that we're heading for in everything that we're doing here. So you have to be okay with that process of working through the other bits. I thought I'd just show this sketch here, which is I've done exactly the same drawing twice, and we were just getting to a point after we'd sort of come up with the characters and developed a style where you're doing 300 drawings for this book, so you really want to nail what's the approach, what's going to look good on the kind of paper that we're printing on. For the cost of a book like this, it kind of needs to be black and white for it to be sort of economically viable to sell for the right ratio. So am I using all the right tones that are going to be reproduced in a book process? It's been really interesting for me learning about all those things. So this was a step where I was saying this kind of line work, and let's just absolutely nail this style before we start on the 300 drawings that we've got to work through. This was another one. So there's a lot of children's books. There's hundreds of children's books that come out each year. So obviously you're always going to have the same ideas as some people. Inevitably, the same ideas come up again and again. But coming up with characters and things, it's amazing how often you trip over something that someone else has already done, even though you'd never seen that work before. And I was really happy with this character that was a socknado. It was basically a tornado made of socks that was going to be this villain kind of character. And I think it might even be Jeff Kinney, who did the Wimpy Kid books, who'd already done a whole book about the socknado or something like that. Yeah. So something that's that specific. So this was just an example of how many times you trip over the work that's already out there, and sort of being aware of that, but not letting it sort of stifle the process as well.
I love the sock tongue, by the way. I did notice that. Very cool.
Oh, yeah. I've forgotten about that. There you go. I thought I'd put this in, which was, these are two different comics that I produced. One was used in the book, and one wasn't used in the book. But this was part of the really enjoyable process of Andy would send me these ideas. So he would sort of leave a page blank in his document, and he would say, potential comic about how a sock saved my life or something like that. And he'd just kind of leave that space blank for me to kind of fill in and try things out.
Wow.
And he was really generous in that approach of sort of leaving a lot of space for me to try different things and experiment. So I came up with this comic about a sock ending up fighting a supercomputer and blowing it up or something like that. And it was just a great chance for me to prove like, hey, this is a kind of thing that I like doing. And he was really receptive to that, and that turned into a comic about this pirate rabbit and the story of how it lost its foot. And that's a section in the book, so it's sort of all a classic illustrated children's book, and then there's a period where it just turns into a comic book for a chapter.
Oh wow!
And then we go back into the story. So I really love that sort of flexibility of the process. We wanted to make it a world that you could really inhabit. So for a period, we thought they were going to have this adventure mobile. It was going to be this car that the characters drive around. And it does turn up in the book, but they crash it immediately. It explodes within about 2 pages. But we thought maybe it would be a bigger character. So I spent ages researching different kinds of cars that could be sort of the adventure car that we would have. We ended up working off this Japanese car called a Nissan Peyo, and I drew up all these different examples of ways that the car could transform, or if it was a walking car or a boat car or a flying car or a car that turns into a tent for camping or things like that. And again, this is just an example of kind of that sense of producing much more than you need to just take the bits. We only ended up using the flying car in the end in the book, but you sort of had all those ideas where you could just pick out the one that was available to you, yeah, or was necessary for the book.
Kind of going down this what if route, and even though you only use one of them, you've kind of got these kind of almost divergent timelines. Like it could have been this and it could have been that.
Yeah.
I love the eco one is on a bike.
Like, yes, it's just the car riding a bike
or anything, but it's actually riding a bike. Amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Amazing.
So I thought I'd include this. This just shows kind of some of the very first sketches of character that did end up in the book. So we were talking through this idea of like, what are the things that you can lose? You can lose your sense of direction. You can lose, I don't know, lose your job. You could lose your mind. You could lose the plot. And it was just a phrase that we thought was funny to work with. You lost the plot. And Andy had this book. I think it's called Plotto, and it's a book that tries to sort of like put a mathematical structure about how to write plots for books. It's this incredibly convoluted argument. But anyway, he liked this idea of a book that had every plot possible for different stories in it. So we came up to this character called Plotty, which is a book that has every possible version of how the story could go within their pages. And you can just see these are the really simple sketches that I did during the live stream, and that's kind of the final character, how it ended up in the book. Something perhaps we can talk about on the live stream tomorrow is sort of thinking of illustrations for a book almost like a comic. Like, how do they work as a sequence? How does one thing flow on from another? Again, sort of thinking about this concept of world building. How do you have like a consistent background, things that give the illustrations a sense of continuity and almost a kind of cinematic kind of feel to them? So I would sort of plot out these sequences that appear on separate pages in the book, sort of one after another, but I wanted to sort of see them together. Like, how do these logically make sense one after another to tell the story? Of in the case of this one, our characters being attacked by an ocean of snapping turtles.
Cool.
Again, this is another one where I just wanted to show you sort of the first really early sketch. We were thinking about things that Johnny Knucklehead could do as a man with a fist for a head, and we just thought about sort of like the devil horns heavy metal sort of symbol, and if he could sort of end up in a bullfight using his sort of his head in the horns position, and this turned into a whole sequence of Johnny Knucklehead fighting a bull, and then the bull became a character in the book. So you can see sort of how it was this very sort of natural process of one silly idea going on to another silly idea that feels like a funny sequence that turning into a kind of part of narrative for the whole story.
And does some of the that collaboration between two creatives, which is what's happening, and I think very unique about this process, is dictating like the words and the story and what Andy is writing. Like, am I correct?
Yeah, it definitely goes back and forth. I mean, sometimes you'll have a phrase or even a name or a section of writing that Andy's really passionate about, and your drawing is just there to service this bit of text or this plot point. And sometimes I would do a drawing that had nothing to do with the story whatsoever. I might see if I can pull up an example of that. Let me go to JPEGs here. These are all the illustrations for the book. So this is a good example. We had a character called Pookie who's a guinea pig, and the bit of text that was there was, "Hey Pookie, would you like a bit of clover?" One of the characters gives this guinea pig a lucky 4-leaf clover, and the guinea pig eats the lucky 4-leaf clover. But I just kind of had this idea in my head of like, it would be cool to see this guinea pig whipping out a napkin and tucking it in and setting a nice table and putting some flowers on the table and lighting a candle and then eating the piece of clover. Right. And doesn't advance the story in any way. It's got nothing to do with it. It's a total distraction, but it's a really lovely sequence. And we thought that was worthwhile to stop everything. We're just going to watch this guinea pig eat this piece of clover, and then we'll pick up the story again. So it definitely goes both directions. And it was really nice that Andy was willing to sort of give the space for that as well, where sometimes the words and the pictures are working totally in tandem, and sometimes one has to sit back and let the other shine. And it's that back and forth that I found really, really exciting.
I just have a quick question from chat, if you don't mind.
Great.
The question is, has working on this book inspired you to perhaps write your own or to create more comics in your personal practice?
That's a really nice question. Thank you, and please do send through questions from chat. I'm keen to answer anything that might come up. I have to say, it has given me. I think when you look at a lot of children's books, like, it looks easy in some ways. Like, you pick it up and you think, I could do this. And it has been such a learning curve of me to watch this process and realize I could not do this. Like, it's really hard to do it really well. It is such a process of, like we were saying, reduction and a focus on quality. So in a sense, it's given me sort of less confidence.
Right.
That I would be able to suddenly write a book myself. But at the same time, I loved the process so much that I've got a bunch of ideas for books that aren't writing focused. They're more illustration and focused. But I've definitely got at least two things that I want to start pitching about that have sort of been ideas that I've picked back up because I've enjoyed this process so much. So it's definitely been a big inspiration for me to push more in the publishing direction. So yes.
Great.
Yeah.
I love that. You find out more about it and you're like, oh, wow, to really do this right. It's also working with someone like Andy, like, as you said, it's been a staple of the, one of the best, right? So you're clearly working with the top team in that sense.
Yeah.
So, now you've seen how much effort goes into and how, exactly. Everything you said it very well. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Yeah. Let's move on. Great.
I thought I'd show you this last one. So before we go on the stream, we were talking about actually next week is a special week in Australia called Book Week, and I think there might be a similar deal in America. But basically, it's a week where primary age kids sort of celebrate books, and there's lots of sort of costume parades and things like that at schools where kids dress up as their favorite characters from books. I heard earlier from Flynn, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, that Flynn's daughter is dressing up as one of my characters for Book Week, a magical rabbit called Zazarillo, which absolutely has made my day.
That's awesome.
And anyway, we were thinking about these characters, which were going to be you and me, and they'd be in these costumes. And we thought it would be great if these were costumes that seemed like the kids or the characters had made them for themselves, but therefore it would be something that would be easy for kids to make if they wanted to dress up as the characters for Book Week. So we had a lot of considerations about what would these costumes look like. We're hoping this will be a series of books, so it was really important for us to get this right. So we spent a long time sending sketches back and forth about what these characters could look like in their costumes. I kind of had this idea of like a box with a hole cut in it, simply because cardboard box in the head is kind of funny. In the background, you can see one of my homemade adventure helmets here. But there's a folklore character, a real character, but a folklore character in Australia called Ned Kelly, who used to wear a bin on his head with a hole cut out. It wasn't a bin. I don't know. He had a mask with a hole cut out.
Was it? Yeah, he was a piece of stove or something. I think.
Oh, really?
I might be getting that wrong. I think it was I think it was cast iron. Like it was, not something to be taken lightly. I think he couldn't move very fast in it.
Yeah. But it's something that's this sort of symbol of this kind of rectangular cutout for the eyes is something that's. It's a very powerful symbol in sort of Australian folklore. So I liked that it kind of represented that a little bit as well. But you can see I was kind of thinking about could the gloves be just gardening gloves? Could the adventure boots just be comfortable slippers or Ugg boots or something that people would have around the house? And these were a number of different sketches sort of thinking along those lines. And this is where we ended up with these two characters. There's the you and the me. And they've both got these boxes on their head. One's got a broom on their head. One's got some thongs stuck in there, or flip-flops for our American audience. These were kind of these exciting kind of costumes that you would make for yourself if you were playing in the backyard as a 7-year-old or something like that. So I thought for the rest of the stream we might actually do a bit of drawing. And I'll sort of talk to you a little bit about the considerations that we had in coming up with these costumes, and what it was like drawing them and the process of drawing something, a character that was going to occur on almost all of the 300 pages of the book. Yeah, just kind of the thoughts that went into that. So if there's any questions about children's book illustration, anything about sort of the business of it, about this project in specific, or about anything that I'm doing when I'm drawing in Photoshop, please chuck them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them. The last thing I'll show you is just some of my homemade masks there, so and cool. Because we want it to be kind of part of the launch of the book, this idea of it's book week, you can make these costumes. We've been putting out lots of stuff about sort of how to, and I've done how-to videos and all sorts of things.
I love the videos you've been doing. It's great to see you doing that stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a really interesting sort of addition that I didn't expect to the whole process. I think it's just the short form video world that we live in. As soon as you're trying to do something, everything needs to be adapted in some form. Yeah. I thought as a last thing on my slideshow, I'll just show you as talking about that process of revising and redoing something until it was just right. It was a long process of coming up with the final cover for the book. And I've just put together all the different versions that we went through of different formats, different names for the book, different characters in the foreground, all sorts of things. So this just shows sort of that process of repetition.
And selfishly, this is just a question for me, not for the audience. Is the book available now, or is it available next week?
It's available. You can pre-order it, but it'll be out on the 13th of August. And then for overseas folks, it's coming out in the UK in September. And then I'm afraid it's next year for America. So I think it might be June next year for the United States.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Fantastic.
Okay. All right. Let me just switch over to Photoshop, and we'll finally start doing some sketching. Thank you for enduring me. If you've got this far before any drawing happens, I always feel like I need to perform a little bit on the Adobe stream. So thanks for listening to me talk so much.
I love it. Thank you very much for a very well thought out kind of presentation. And as Bill said, I'll give him a chance to rest his voice for a second and warm up. As he said, if you do have questions about sort of the whole process, such a unique person to have on, I think, like such an interesting process to go through. I've certainly got lots of questions myself, but if you have any of your own, let us know in chat while we are live, and I'll pass them on to Bill and we can talk about it. I think one of my many takeaways, but one of my biggest is that collaborative experience that you've had that you could only get and you would only want between two creatives. Like that reminds me a lot of like a garage band, like of people getting together and jamming, not trying to learn to how to perform, but getting together and jamming and then discovering what their sound is. That's
a really interesting comparison. Sort of Andy's background is that he was in a punk band out of university, and it was this very punk ethos of kind of do it yourself, make your own posters, promote your own show, this sort of chaotic approach to music making. And he's told me stories about when he first started writing, and he was traveling around to schools and talking to children about sort of creative writing, and he wanted to sort of give them some of the stuff that he'd made. He didn't have a publisher or anything like that, so he'd photocopy his stories and he'd fold them up himself and staple them and make these miniature little books that he'd sell to the kids for 20 cents each. And it's this very sort of do-it-yourself approach. And one thing I made when we were just starting the book, we were 3 chapters in, and I made this tiny, tiny little book. So this is a little stapled together or glued together sort of version of the first draft of the book.
Wow.
And it was a very sort of joyful approach to this collaborative approach of going back and forth. And I think it was something that required a lot of kind of I mean, we were both just kind of mutually excited about the process. It was just fun. So that was a big part of it. But a lot of mutual respect and a sort of a feeling of kind of like a psychological safety going into it as well. Like it was a place that we could share ideas, and it was going to be fun and okay. And I'm really grateful for that kind of that process or that atmosphere that we were working in.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. Not surprising. You did mention the punk band stuff. I wasn't stealing it from that, but it does not surprise
Oh,
me
right.
because it really does. It really really resonates. Not that I'm a musician or anything, but it does resonate with that kind of process, because we have lots of people from different sort of backgrounds here on Adobe Live. Like you might think illustrators all fit in one box, but they certainly don't. Like the process can be very very different, and this is a really unique one that I'm sure I'll talk about quite a bit to other people. Just this very interesting process.
Right.
It's the same with designers and stuff, right? Like your role as a designer in an advertising agency is very different to the role of a freelance designer. You know, you were talking about the short form world that we live in. You know, anybody that's trying to promote themselves, you have to learn how to make videos of some kind. Make something move. At least move, or trick the algorithm into thinking that it's a video in some sense, and that just didn't exist even a few years ago. It's quite interesting.
Yeah. One thing we've talked about in previous sessions when we were doing character design stuff is the importance of like a recognizable silhouette for a character. There's a lot of scenes in this book where a character is like tiny on the page, or there's just a silhouette of them, or maybe you're just seeing a shadow of them or something like that. And you want it to be very simple for characters to know who's where on the page and what they're doing. So a big part of this process for me was those kind of like simple box heads. One of them's got kind of a mohawk on top. One of them's a simple box head with the sort of bunny ears / thongs on top of the head. Sorry, this is drawn wrong. Another part of it was that one has a sort of tall, thin head, and one's got a much more square-shaped head. It's really simple things like that that made the process a lot easier throughout the book of knowing who was doing what and which character was speaking at any one time.
Yeah.
I have these characters kind of in these suits that covers them up, and they were kind of initially, and they still are. They're kind of like spacesuits. They're a bit kind of chunky and baggy because I wanted it to be sort of very agnostic of what kind of person might be in the suit. So any reader can imagine that it's them wearing this particular suit. But they were becoming a little bit sort of, when I started drawing them, they were kind of almost like those characters from that video game that kids, I think it's called I think it's called Among Us. Yeah, they were kind of a bit too amorphous and blobby, and they weren't very good for showing action through. And actually, one thing that for some reason was kind of the key to the character was I kind of came up with these kind of like puffy pants that just stopped just before the top of their Ugg boots. And for some reason, that just gave it a much more dynamic shape, I thought, and made them a lot more fun to draw in action. So that's kind of just the general layout. And there's always things that you need to remember, like for each time you're drawing, it's like what are the accessories of this character? So the me character always has a backpack on and a utility belt, and he's got a sort of rope coming out of the utility belt. So I kind of had a checklist, and he's got this circular thing in the middle of his chest. Kind of had this checklist in my mind about like square head, backpack, belt, rope, circular thing on the chest. Now we've got the you character, and you kind of have those kind of keys that let you know who's in action at any one time.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I'm sure you dream about all of those things, all of those elements at this stage.
Yes, they are very, very hardwired into my brain at this point. So I'll draw one of the characters kind of in action, and I'll talk about sort of some of the considerations. One of the things that I was really happy about with this design is that because it is kind of a simple box shape for the main character, it's very easy for kids to draw as well. It's something that's easily sort of easy to reproduce. I'm sure I've created a world of pain for the children of Australia by going with Johnny Knucklehead for having to draw a fist for the head each time. But
I'll
at least
never be
these main two
successful. I
characters.
can't draw my favorite character from my favorite book. That's rough. Yeah.
So these ones are a bit easier. There are some things like originally this character didn't have, because it was a cardboard box on the head, we couldn't see their mouth. And originally I just kind of had them as like almost like not that they didn't speak, but they didn't express through their mouth. And I had one character where you could see, actually, sorry, it's this character, I haven't drawn it in. You can see their eyeballs. One of the characters you can see their eyeballs and one of them you can't. And originally I had one where you had sort of this character, you could just see their eyes, and this character you couldn't see their, they had a mouth, but they didn't have eyes. They just had sort of that black rectangle. And I was going to have it. Do you know the magician's Penn and Teller?
Yes.
So one of them speaks and one of them doesn't speak.
Yeah,
one of them's kind of like a straight man character, and they have this great dynamic in that you sort of, one of them's very emotive with their body, and one of them is very expressive with their voice, and they kind of work in parallel to form one character. And I kind of thought of trying something similar with that, but in the end, you always needed both characters to be facing the viewer to express what they were feeling, and that was becoming a little bit too convoluted. So we ended up putting two mouths on both of them. It doesn't make any physical sense in terms of, like, obviously you can't see someone's mouth just stuck on top of a box, but it's one of those considerations you're like, no, doesn't matter.
Bit of artistic license in there. Yeah, it's better for
absolutely.
the story.
Yeah,
it's so cool.
Because it's quite a rigid character, I needed some things that still sort of showed movement. So the bunny ears, the flip-flops on top of the head were really good for that, to sort of show when someone was running or jumping. But they were great as well for sort of expression. Like if someone was sad, you could have them sort of, their flip-flops would flop down, or if they were alert, you could kind of have little lines like that, and they were just kind of additional ways to show character, even though obviously they have no control over the flip-flops on their head. You could sort of use that in the drawing to show expression.
It's so interesting. So it's like these things from nature that we're used to in more of an abstract sense, like, can help communicate that, like even to children, that okay, now we're feeling a little bit more sad, and now we're alert and we're awake and we're happy, or those kind of emotions. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so I'll just put the backpack on this character.
I know that we are in Photoshop right now, but is that the main like app that you used for this project?
Yeah, I mean, I finalized all of the work in Photoshop. Sometimes I was sketching. I sketched up a lot of the drawings on the iPad. But yes, it all became sort of finalized in Photoshop, especially for sort of the final rendering of everything. I kind of just wanted that flexibility to work on all the characters individually. And also I ended up using, I don't know if I've got it here in my libraries, but it was really great to have kind of like, you can see I've got the libraries panel on just above my layers on the right hand side of the screen, and I would kind of have sort of drag and drop reference for the characters. So I would have kind of like a breakdown of everything that I needed on the characters there. I even had sort of a flip-flops template that I could drop in for my character to get the thongs drawn correctly.
Just get so the little shape things right, like the that, silhouette and everything. Yeah, exactly. So early on, that was a big part of it, doing that sort of thing. And it was an interesting process because
previous illustrator that Andy had worked with had done everything on ink and paper. We we wanted we wanted to be able to sort of move a little bit quicker in terms of turning around the illustrations. So obviously we had all the benefits of digital with that, but we needed a way to sort of replicate that kind of natural feel in the book as well. I think that was a really important part of the feeling that we wanted to carry through. So I had lots of sort of really nice sort of scratchy natural texture brushes like this one that I used for a lot of the shading.
Yeah.
Just to sort of make sure that that feeling came through in the final illustrations.
And did you find, what's your range of brushes that are used? Is there one or two brushes that are used throughout that are kind of used 90% of the time, or are you all over the place? There's lots of different brushes because there's lots of different types of scenes. Like, can you talk a little bit about like brush selection? Brush selection.
Bit
of a mouthful.
Yeah. No, I tried to keep it really minimal actually. I think there was only 3 brushes that I used for the whole book. Wow. And I think that was intentional in that I feel like even if you're not consciously picking it up, I think when you have too many textures going on, it starts to feel a little overworked, and sometimes it feels too digital. If you're using too many different brushes, it's identifiable that the way that this image is being made is a bit more artificial. So I really only had I think it was four brushes. So I had 2 that were sort of broad texture ones. So I think it was that one and this much more scratchy one. I kind of had 2 different levels of scratchiness for shading. And then I had my kind of inking line, which is the one I've been using for years and years. It's kind of my standard inking brush. But one thing I did need to introduce was that there was lots of speech bubbles in this book. And I really had to work on my typography. It wasn't something I've spent a lot of time doing in the past. And so I had this one brush that I used for all of the typography. And I'm not a typographer by trade in any way, but I realized that one of the most important things I needed in this book was clarity, because you're trying to tell jokes a lot of the time. There's lots of silly things happening, and you're trying to tell jokes, and it's like if you see a stand-up comedian and they're telling a joke and they fumble a word, for some reason it just snaps you out of it. You kind of, if they trip over their words once, you kind of lose the ease or the confidence that you have in the person. And it's almost like a similar thing with doing cartoons or comics or something like that. I always liked doing kind of sort of sketchy rough writing. I would do something like "Let's go" or something like that there. But if you zoom out and it's on a page, you kind of need it to feel seamless for the reader. So I had to kind of move away from that sort of thing, and it felt like I was felt kind of boring to me, to be honest, the way that I was doing the typography for the book. But looking at it as a whole, I'm much more happy with a very simple approach to it.
Right.
Where up close it doesn't look particularly interesting, but you just want to be able to sort of sell the message so nobody's thinking about it.
See it as at a glance and from far away and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Incredible. We actually only have about 2 minutes left today, so we'll start kind of wrapping up. But thank you everyone for watching live, and if you're watching on demand as well, there's a link to the next session if you are watching on demand. If you're watching live, that we're going to be doing that tomorrow, and we'll be doing it live. So please do join us. It's at 12 o'clock Australian Eastern something time. I just say something because I can't remember what the S stands for. But this time, same time tomorrow, wherever you are in the world. So please tune in, come and check it out. And we'll kind of move on to the second part of this tiny little series. But I've had a great time, Bill. And
wonderful.
This is such a special project. Makes me extremely happy to watch all of this.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your part in the whole thing, Flynn.
That's incredible.
It's a very important, it's a big deal for me, and it's been such a fun project. And I kind of love that it evolved so naturally out of things that we were already doing. If you're interested in checking out the next one that we're doing tomorrow, I think we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the mechanics of trying to draw funny pictures and compositions. And I'll go through some of the bigger, more complex drawings that we did for the book and talk about some things around sort of like page setup and layouts and all kind of the fun technical stuff that comes in with making a book.
Amazing. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. Again, thank you again, Bill, and thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time on Adobe Live. Bye, everyone.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, guys.